We'd like to thank our sponsors, the Hydration Foundation, a nonprofit organization focused on better hydration for people, plants, animals, and soil. As the leading authority on hydration, the Hydration Foundation is dedicated to solving our health on this planet through creating better systems and conversations when it comes to water and how it moves through our bodies, irrigation, and food systems. You can learn more about the Hydration Foundation by navigating to www.hydrationfoundation.org. You can donate to Hydration Foundation's program to restore soil through water. With $33, we can rehydrate and decontaminate 1 acre of farmland with a better way for irrigation. Hi, my name is Yasmin Tarehi, and this is Gateways to Awakening. Today's episode is about the cosmos and investigating our place in the universe. On today's episode, we'll be featuring our guest, Neil deGrasse Tyson, an astrophysicist and author of more than a dozen books, one of which you may recognize, Astrophysics in a Hurry. He is the host of StarTalk, podcast, and Cosmos, televised by Fox and National Geographic. He's also received 21 honorary doctorates, as well as NASA's Distinguished Public Service Medal. I'm so excited to welcome Neil to the show. Welcome, Neil.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm always happy to bring some universe down to earth for whoever will listen.
This is great. Yeah. And we have, a mainstream audience that I think might be beginners all the way to intermediates in this space. So I just want to kick it off with, what is our place in the universe? I mean, are we truly alone?
Yeah. So those are two really different questions, unless you define what your place is based on the existence of others, which I wouldn't recommend. Our place in the universe, I think, is let's start out by our location, right? Of course, we are on Earth. It was a little bit devastating to people's ego when we learned that Earth is not alone of its kind, even in our own star system. There are other planets, right? So the fact that we're on a planet itself was not special. But then we have this beautiful, warm orb in the sky called the sun, and that clearly looks different from the stars. And that's why they have two different words. The sun is the sun and the stars are the stars. We would then learn that the sun is just another star. It just happens to be really close. And so now we have the sun and the planets, and of course we have comets and moons and this sort of thing. Well, where is the sun? For the long while, we believed, based on some scant evidence, but also our ego helps this belief, that the sun is in the center of all the stars in the night sky. That wasn't the case either. It gets worse all the way down, right? So Earth isn't special. The sun isn't special. Our location isn't special. There are 400 billion other stars in the Milky Way galaxy. Then 1929, Edwin Hubble, the man after whom the telescope was named, discovers that, in 1926, Edwin Hubble discovers that our galaxy is not even alone in the universe. There's countless other galaxies, this great organization of stars, which are akin to cities, really, right? Many people live huddled together in cities and others scattered in the countryside, but the cities are sort of where all the action is. So our galaxy was not even unique. And then a few years later, the 1929 date, he would discover that the universe is expanding. It kind of looks like we're in the center of that, and our ego helped that along for a while until we realized, no, we're not. So we have a sense of where we are in the universe, but that doesn't come along with meaning, I don't think. Often when people want to know their place, they want to know how they should feel about it, how they should reflect upon it. Yeah. And so the most profound information I can share with you that I even know of, I think this tops my list, comes to us from research in astrophysics in a research paper published in 1957. So we're going back a ways, nearly 70 years. By the way, you probably haven't heard of this research paper because it was 4 people And they didn't say eureka overnight burning a midnight oil. It took a decade, right? So those kind of stories don't make it into the movies, all right? But anyway, in my field, we all know who these are and what this paper is. It's the first to show that the ingredients that comprise life, your body, my body, all life on Earth, are traceable to stars that manufactured the carbon and the oxygen and the nitrogen, manufactured them, and then scattered them into the galaxy to enable subsequent star systems to birth planets. And on those planets, birth life, because life has these ingredients. So when you look up at the night sky, you are not simply separate from those stars. You're not distinct from the universe, even if you want to think so. In fact, not only are we in the universe, but the universe is in us. And we have this urge to think that being special means you're different from everybody else. But instead, I think being special means you are the same as everything else. I mean, think about it. If you know you have stardust within you, that makes you akin to the universe. And that makes me feel large when I look up at night rather than small. So this is some of the infusions of what it is to know who we are and what our place is in the universe.
Wow. And can we talk a little bit more about the planets? Like, how are the planets classified today, right? Some of them are made up of different matter than others.
Yeah, I don't want to dwell on a classification scheme. Let's not distract ourselves with that's a perfectly legitimate question. And lesson plans and textbooks like to do that because you can test it with multiple choice questions. It lends itself to that, but it doesn't lend itself to deep understanding. So rather than think of classifications, let's think of properties. Okay, so there are planets that have gaseous atmospheres. Earth among them. So is Mars and Venus. And some planets have so much atmosphere that they're mostly atmosphere. And then you get Jupiter and Saturn and Uranus and Neptune. Then there's some moons that have atmospheres. That's kind of cool. We know that our moon famously doesn't, but some other moons do. There's a moon of Saturn, has an atmosphere. Titan, one of the largest moons in the solar system. So that's kind of interesting. So some places have air. All right, different compositions, but let's just call it air. Then some other classes of objects are just kind of icy. All right, comets are top of that list. Oh, by the way, Pluto is icy. Okay, sorry about that. That's just deal with it. Okay, get over it. Pluto, more than half of its volume is ice.
Wow.
And if Pluto ventured close to Earth, if Pluto ventured close to the sun, heat from the sun would evaporate that ice, and Pluto would grow a tail. That's no kind of behavior for a planet, right? So Pluto got into Pluto got what was coming to it, I should say, because it had masqueraded as a planet in our catalogs for so long. And then you realize, no, its properties are just completely different and more akin to other objects for which we have other names. And so anyway, so if you add it all up, there's some fascinating things going on in the solar system. And there's entire branches of my field of people just thinking about these problems and challenges. And you know who else you need? You need the geologists in the room. Because, of course, geo, is the Greek prefix, means earth. And geometry literally means earth measurement. All right. That's to show you how people were thinking about it back then. But so geo means earth, and we don't have a word for Marsology, right? It's still geology on Mars. But nonetheless, geologists have a field day thinking about these rocky planets and rocky moons. And so it's quite the multidisciplinary backyard that we have.
Yeah. Wow. So fascinating. And Neil, you talked earlier about how everything is expanding in the universe. And so what does that mean for our existence on Earth? And is everything kind of expanding at the same rate? So for example, you mentioned that if Jupiter got close to the sun, that it would change the atmosphere or melt all the ice.
Oh, if Pluto got too close. Yeah.
Oh, Pluto, sorry, not Jupiter.
Yeah.
Pluto. Yeah. And so what does that mean for us if everything is expanding?
Yeah, it doesn't mean anything for us.
Okay.
Sorry. I know you wanted to say something deep. I think I tweeted once. I think I tweeted this. It was, yeah. What I tweeted was you can't blame the umpire's enlarged strike zone on the expanding universe. Can't blame that's a baseball. I think we were in the middle of the World Series or something, and I said that. But a more sort of less specific bit of humor related to that would be, if the universe is expanding, how come I'm still stuck in traffic? So when will I get some of that benefit, right, from the expanding universe? So it's expanding on its largest scales, and that expansion, the forces that gird the life that we lead. These are the forces that hold your molecules together, the forces that keep you attached to Earth. Those forces locally are far in excess of what's going on in the expanding universe. So the expanding universe does not manifest in our lives. You have to look across large scales in the universe, and then you see it. And this is what Hubble first measured in 1929. So galaxies are hurtling away from each other and one another.
Wow. Neil, what's the latest discovery when it comes to our planetary existence in this galaxy, like new planets that have been discovered? And maybe this is the most surprising thing that you've learned in the last year or so when it comes to the galaxy.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. I mean, it's a highly active field. And often what's more exciting than some discovery is the potential for more discoveries given some piece of equipment that just was designed, invented, built, applied. So, for example, I was quite enchanted by the fact that just in recent months, 3 countries sent probes to Mars. China, the United Arab Emirates, first for Arab states, and the United States. All 3 had probes launched around the same time, understandably because the orientation of Earth and Mars in our orbits around the sun are only favorable for this sort of transfer every 2.5 years or so. So generally, everyone sort of loads up for that trip, and everyone leaves together. Basically, everyone left within a month of each other. So that's kind of fun. And all these, the rovers and orbiters, and the American one even has a helicopter. Now that's badass. You can say, all right, this rover thing, it's so 1990s. Let's put in a helicopter. So there's a helicopter, which is more an engineering test than anything else. It has more engineering principles to be tested about it than scientific experiments to pave the way for future missions to Mars, where it might become routine to have a copter. But it had to be specially designed because the atmosphere of Mars is so thin that the speed of the rotors and how big the rotors are have to compensate for that so that it gets the lift that it needs. But what's good about it is, the rover is not going to climb up a steep hill and down from the lip of a crater. Whereas a helicopter, you can just lift it up. It's like a drone, right? You can control it the way you control drones. You lift it up and then it drops down in, and you can go almost anywhere with it. So when you ask what discovery have I embraced, I could tell you that, but I'm even more excited about these new frontiers that are opening up because of our engineering ingenuity.
Wow. I had no idea that those 3 countries went, and the United Arab Emirates. That's quite incredible.
Yeah, all in. Yeah, and
Wow.
they're on their 50th anniversary, I think, or it's a decadal anniversary. I forgot which one, 50 or 60. And so they wanted, and they're also having an expo of this in the spirit that, remember, like, the world used to do this every 5-10 years. There's the World's Fair in New York and the Paris Expo. You go back to, when was that, 18, whatever. These are places where countries would come and show their fanciest, most interesting engineering marvels, right? So, and that's kind of a lost art in recent decades, but they're trying to resurrect that. So there's even an expo, and you look at the architectural drawings of it, it looks like the future that never came. Right? I mean,
Wow.
you go back to in the 1950s and 60s and think about Tomorrowland, and everything was about the future. No one thinks that way anymore, but when we did, that's when the TV show The Jetsons was made, right? And
Right.
in that era. And so everybody's, of course, in flying cars and motorized walkways and monorails and all the like. That expo as designed looks just like that. I just want to, so somebody in the world is thinking about the future, even if we're not.
Wow. Neil, so this question comes up a lot. And so it might be maybe a little bit too basic for you, but I actually just think it's important to talk about some of the building blocks of astrophysics and physics. And so I'm wondering if we can just quickly define like a few terms that everyone should know, at the very basic level.
You mean like what is astrophysics to begin with?
Well, more like what is a proton, atom, neutron? Like, yeah.
I got you. Okay, so
Yeah.
you want the universe 101. That's what you want,
Yeah, I think it would be helpful for folks because I think, so I think people in your circle are very much attuned to a lot of these terms. But I think there's so many people in the world right now who just haven't had any exposure to even basic physics. So I
Okay,
think,
that's fine.
yeah.
That's fine.
Mhm.
And I think my terms up till now have been pretty straight.
Yes. Yeah.
But because I think about that often. But if you want to dive in like with 2 feet, okay, head first. You want to go with 2 feet first or head first? How do you want to go?
Uh,
So let me back up for a minute. All right, think about our senses, our 5 traditional senses, right? So sight, hearing, taste, touch. I left one out.
Smell.
Smell. Thank you. So these are our 5 senses, and this is the traditional senses, and this is the entirety of our access to our world around us. There was no reason before science was invented, there was no real reason to think or believe that things could be going on that were not available to your senses. Why would you think that? If I'm sight, you knew some people were blind and some people had better eyesight than others, but if you had good eyesight, you saw everything. How could there be something in this world that your senses could not touch or see or figure out? All right. If there was a smell, of course, you smelled it. And if you didn't smell it, it meant there was no smell. Now, we knew dogs had a more sensitive smell than others, but we didn't think they were smelling things you couldn't if you brought it close enough to your nose, right? So we're thinking that our senses are just the bee's knees here, all right? And then what happens? Oh, by the way, if that's what you think, and then a plague comes, and you have no idea what's causing the plague, then you have to resort to sort of spiritual causes, magical causes. So, 14th century Europe that lost tens of millions of people to I guess that was the Black Plague. What's the reason for it? Is it because there's a microscopic thing you can't see that's influencing you? No, that's not even a thought. It's because God brought it down upon you because you sinned. There were all kinds of explanations offered. All right. And there were some sectors that had better hygiene than others. There's like a Muslim sector. In Muslim traditions, there's a lot of cleansing that goes on of feet and hands. And so they get the plague a little less often than others. Oh, it's because they're not Christian, right? So the sheer, but you just look at what we are prone to think about the causes and effects of things when we didn't have science as a tool. There is no time in the past where I'm going to say, oh, gee, I long for these olden days. No, I don't. No one does. Really. Think it through. Okay. Think that one through, please. Okay. Especially if you're Black and especially if you're female. This world was not conceived for either of us. Okay. So there's no time better than the present, and let's hope the future keeps going in whatever direction it's going relative to back then. All right. Oh, there's another one. Okay. You know that that The plague, as many understand it, was carried by fleas on the backs of mice and rats. Okay, and so if you're a woman living alone with a cat, you don't have mice and rats because the cat eats them.
Wow.
Okay, here's everyone dying of the plague except for you. All right. You're a female and you have a cat, and it's the 14th century Europe, and you're not getting sick, and everybody else is. You caused it, and you're a witch. All right.
Mm.
You get me angry just thinking about all this. Anyhow, what was I talking about?
Building blocks of physics. Yeah.
Okay. So around 1600, there was a remarkable pair of inventions that happened within 10 years of each other. It was the discovery of the microscope and the telescope, the invention of the microscope and the telescope. And each of those enabled our visual senses to take in aspects of the world that were not directly available to us. So Leeuwenhoek, a Dutch physicist, optician, what do they call him? He was an expert in optics. He developed a new kind of compound microscope, and he had the wherewithal. He didn't say, well, let me just look at my hangnail magnified 100 times. He could have, and that's interesting, but that's just a hangnail you're seeing up close. He took a drop of pond water and put it under his microscope. And then to even think to do that, right? What? It's just water and it's transparent. Why would you think anything is there? But he just wondered. So he takes it, puts it under his microscope, and there was a whole universe of creatures, one-celled organisms doing the backstroke. And he wrote about this and sent it to his colleagues at the Royal Society of London. And they wrote back and said, stop drinking gin before you look through your new device. Would you? It was a funny response, because why would anyone believe? Plus, he called them little animals, animalcules, was one of the cutest words ever invented.
Oh.
Animalcules. And why would you believe this? All right. But of course, since we're scientists, you don't take his word for it. So what they did was they sent people up to his lab to affirm what he saw, because maybe he was imagining it. And that's part of the scientific method. Always get a second, third, fourth view, measurement of a claim, especially if the claim is extraordinary. And sure enough, there's an entire microscopic universe that coexists with us in this world. And with the telescope, we learn, no, Earth is not alone as a planet. We orbit the sun like all the other things that we call planets, and the sun is not even unusual. 100 billions of billions of those, right? So as we said, the universe comes to us from the telescope. The larger universe, the smaller universe comes to us through the microscope. Now, to get directly to your question, what we found was that in order to understand what's going on the small scales and what's going on the large scales, we not only had to collect the data with these instruments, it turns out they're responding in ways and according to forces that don't manifest in our lives. And thus was the birth of physics, as we have now come to think of it, with forces, and these animalcules are made of molecules, and molecules are made of atoms, and atoms are made of particles. And you find this out because you make an even better microscope, and they're called particle accelerators. You're probing the atom. All right. And we have even better telescopes. We're probing the beginning of the universe. So something I tweeted recently, which I'm happy to reiterate here and now, is that the universe is under no obligation to make sense to you. Because it is not unfolding according to the way nature has revealed itself to your five senses. And so the triumphs of science are to create this coherent picture and understanding of how it's all put together and how it all works and why it all works. And that's why it's a bit frustrating when you put in all this effort and then you have people who think science is just some other subject that they could take or leave or ignore. And if it doesn't fulfill their desires, they'll just, because they don't agree with it, that they can just discount it. You don't have that option.
Right.
The science is true whether or not you believe in it. And what I mean by true is if you experimentally show something is going on and that's verified and the usual checks and balances, and that emerges on the other side of that skepticism as in a phenomenon that's still there, you've got a new understanding of the universe to deal with. And if it upsets how you think the universe should be, that really doesn't matter.
Right.
If you gain weight next week, you can't complain and want to repeal the law of gravity. So you're stuck with those 3 extra pounds. Deal with it. So, if I can impress upon your fan base, your listeners, that science advances when we find ways to replace our senses, because our senses are not only inadequate, they are misleading to our own understanding of things.
Yeah.
Look at these books you can buy that have what do you call these things where is it in the page or out of the page? Optical illusions. Look at an simple optical illusion book. You love them when you're kids, right? And there's simple line drawings of things.
Yeah.
And your brain, is it in the page? Is it out of the page? Is it facing left? I don't know. Oh my gosh. And these are simple drawings. And now we want to try to bring these same senses and understand the universe in an objective way. That's hard, if not impossible, without the methods and tools of science. And I'm a scientist to participate in that adventure.
I love that. And Neil, yeah, I think science has had such an interesting. People have had very different points of view on the world of science. Especially the last year, I heard this really great phrase. I can't remember who said it now. It was actually another podcast host. He said, "Facts are not feelings," and I think I kind of added to that and said, "Feelings aren't facts," and I think both are true. Right? There's just this paradox of we feel before we think as humans. So I think people sometimes divorce the entire field of science when it comes to, over-indexing on their feelings.
Yeah, because your feelings are very real to you. I mean, in all fairness to those who feel that way, feel that their feelings are important, the feelings, there's nothing more real to you than how you feel about something. And by the way, that manifests in people's enthusiasm for a religion that they might hold or some other sort of belief system. If you're Christian, you feel deeply that Jesus is your savior and that God is watching over you. And so in the United States, these feelings are protected, right? Unless you having that feeling subtracts from the rights of others. So I'm not here to take away people's feelings, but what I do want to impress upon you is that if you want to ask, if you have the power to enact legislation or write laws, those laws should be based on something that's objectively true and that does not pivot on your feelings. Because in a pluralistic country, your feelings are different from someone else's feelings. And in order to have a country under the one roof, whatever is controlling everything legally should be based on things that are not pivoting on any one person's feelings. And that's an important dimension of this. Now, of course, the courts are susceptible to feelings, right? That's the whole point of the, at least on TV, the lawyers have their final say and they try to convince the jury. And if law was really only about facts, you wouldn't need a jury. You would just have some people who are good at evaluating facts, right? And so the very system of our jury, though they don't really admit it to themselves or to anyone else, has folded in the fact that people have feelings in whether someone gets convicted or not.
Right. Wow. Yeah. We can just go down that rabbit hole. I have a lot of questions there. But I wanted to quickly ask you about the stars and how human beings are made up of the stars. And I also have a personal desire to know this, because I don't know if I told you this earlier, but I actually wrote a short film called A Star in the Desert. And unbeknownst to me, I had actually made this kind of illusion that this child gets kind of pushed back into the universe as stardust, essentially. And so I didn't even know at the time that humans were made up of the stars, but I'm super fascinated by this comment. I've heard it from a lot of folks, and I was wondering if you could just talk to us about what that means.
So clearly you felt it. You had a feeling.
The primordial intelligence.
There you go. Okay, so all evidence tells us that the universe began around 14 billion years ago. The universe. By the way, our solar system is much younger than that, beginning only about 5 billion years ago. So the universe is nearly 3 times as old as the solar system. So if you go back to those earliest moments, all evidence shows that we began with the elements hydrogen, mostly hydrogen and helium. And hydrogen is the simplest element. It has only one proton in its nucleus. And if you remember the periodic table of elements that sat in the front of your chemistry class, that table is they might not have told it to you this way, but what it is a sequence of how many protons are in the element's nucleus. So hydrogen has 1 proton, helium has 2 protons, lithium has 3 protons, beryllium has 4. So and it goes all around it, and every element increments by 1 proton. And that's what distinguishes the fundamental identity of one element versus another, just whether you add a proton or take one away. Well, if the whole universe began as hydrogen, primarily 99 out of 10 atoms in the universe were hydrogen. And we have oxygen in us and carbon. If you remember from science fiction, we're thought of as carbon-based life. That's legitimate. Where did the carbon come from? Stars, under the action of heat and pressure in their cores, cram hydrogen atoms together, fuses them under these high temperatures to make heavier elements. And that entire process is called thermoheat, nuclear, because it's the nucleus, fusion, bringing together, thermonuclear fusion. So that goes on every day, every second, every moment inside of all stars, thermonuclear fusion. And not all stars get to make a whole lot of elements. Some only make a few. But the massive ones with the high temperatures and the high pressures, those make significant progress through the periodic table of elements. And if wherever they land there, it won't be of use to us unless those elements can come outside of the star. Turns out those are the same stars that explode.
Wow.
And they scatter their enrichment across the galaxy. And it contaminates or enriches other gas clouds out of which the next generation of star systems are formed. We are such a star system, having benefited from exploding stars billions of years ago. And so you have every right to speak poetically and literally that we are stardust.
Wow. That's incredible.
Now, I don't know I wouldn't know what it would be like to be reconstituted back as stardust. I'm not in a hurry to have that happen to me. I don't know, whatever happened in your story, was it painful?
Yeah, it was from the perspective of a child in a war zone.
Yes, anything to escape.
Yeah. I'll have to send it to you, actually.
See, if I'd written that story, because I don't really have interest in becoming stardust again in that one. I would want to be abducted by aliens. And aliens would save me from the war zone.
Oh, maybe that's the sequel.
In the song, I don't know how old you are, but there's a song, I guess it was from the 1970s, by the band Styx, which was kind of a rock group of the day. And they have a song called Come Sail With Me. It's a beautiful song. With the sailing metaphor as there's a frontier and you don't know where it's going to land, but we're together. And it's got all the right it pushes the right buttons of your sense of adventure and being on a quest. And in the end, it talks about meeting angels who invited them up from the ship once they're far away from land. But then then there's a disclaimer and it says, no, I thought, this is in the script, it says, in the lyrics, it says, I thought that they were angels, but to my surprise, it was a starship and taking me to the skies. And so basically that's an alien abduction in that song. You don't know about until the last line.
Wow, I'll have to check that out. Come sail with me.
Check it out. Come
Okay.
sail with me.
Oh, so cool. Neil, what has been your approach to the scientific method evolving? I mean, what is your kind of approach in general to science evolving? And what's sort of the things that we need to know as it relates to that?
Yeah, let me invert the question.
Okay.
It's a perfectly legitimate question, but let me just invert it.
Okay.
Because I think you'll appreciate what I do with it. So instead of asking, what do I do with the scientific, as a scientist, when I do science, how does the scientific method manifest? Let me invert that and say, because I'm a scientist and I have training in the scientific method, how do I apply that to life? That's a way more potent invocation of the scientific method. And but I'll still answer your question. So the scientific method I've summarized, and I'm happy to repeat that summary for you, into one sentence. Scientific method is do whatever it takes so that you are not fooled into thinking something is true that is not, or that something is not true that is. That's the scientific method in a nutshell.
Powerful.
And anything else, any other description you've ever read is a manifestation of that credo. The credo, is that the right word?
Yeah, I think so.
There's credo, there's adage, there's rubric, whatever. Just that saying, all right? So they say, well, you need to have a control sample and you need to perform the experiment multiple times. These are all so that you're not fooled into thinking something is true that is not. Whatever steps you can take to minimize the chances of you being led astray are legitimate scientific method. So in life, when you want to make a decision, so here's something that you don't expect this answer, because the people who are the great writers are people who feel, right? And they communicate these feelings, and we all, as humans, embrace this. But if I were to sort of reword it, I would say, when there's a conflict between your mind and your heart, go with your mind.
Yep.
Okay? Go with your mind. And because your mind has the capacity to evaluate what is or is not true, even in the face of what you want to be true or not true. And the urge to want things to be true or not true can completely blind you, especially in a relationship or in, or important life decisions that you have to make. And so take advantage of the fact that you have a brain. I mean, since when is the brain a problem for you, right? Relative to emotions that are so susceptible to desires. So, yeah, I think the scientific method can be hugely influential to you and useful in making important life decisions.
And Neil, what about with all the misinformation?
Wait, did I answer? I know I readjusted your question, but did I do justice to it?
You definitely did. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a powerful point. Everyone needs to think about. I wanted to just double click on this point because as it applies to what's happening right now in culture, it feels like there's so much misinformation. There's a lack of reality versus lies. And so how do you apply that, like the investigation of truth, when it comes to things that you can't physically, contact? Like what's your approach with all this misinformation now?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and there's a lot in it. So let me just pick pieces out of it that I feel comfortable giving good answers to, and then I'll take other pieces where I'll give crappy answers to it. Okay.
Okay.
I'll give the good answers first. So one of them is, you can ask, well, why do we have a resurgence or a surgence of people who think the world is flat? That's kind of weird, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we've been to the moon, for goodness sake, and the people think Earth is flat. So I think to myself, that we coexist in this world with, quote, flat earthers is evidence of two things. That here in the United States, we live in a country that protects free speech. And the second point, it's evidence of a failed educational system. Because if you go around thinking that way, it's because you don't know how to evaluate evidence. And in most science classes that are taught, they don't teach how to evaluate evidence. They say, here's what the DNA molecule is, and here's what the combustion engine is, and here's, and here's what a molecule is. And so you have these facts that can be tested with multiple choice questions. And at no time do you see, think, or feel that science is an enterprise. Science is a way of querying nature above all else. And the rest just flows out of that. To think of science as a satchel of facts and then move on is to not fully understand how science works and why. So that's with regard to flat earthers. There are others. By the way, I don't mind if you want to be a flat earther. Just I want to make sure you don't ever become the head of NASA, right? Plenty of jobs for you if you want to think Earth is flat. There was a basketball player, Kyrie Irving, played for the Boston Celtics. I think he got traded maybe recently, but I think he's an active player. And he got all up on Twitter saying he thinks Earth is flat. And then people started asking me to react to him. And I said, he plays basketball. I don't care what he thinks about the shape of the Earth. All right, I'm cool with this. All right. He would later confess. Is that the right word? Confess. He would later reveal that he looked at one YouTube video on flat Earth, and then YouTube kept pounding him.
Wow.
It went straight to another video on this same, and another, and another, and another. And he fell really deep down the flat Earth rabbit hole. And at no time was any video sent his way rebutting any of the arguments that had been given. And so there he is thinking he's getting to the bottom of a real thing that's a cover up from NASA. And he would later confess that he then spent time looking at scientific accounts of the shape of the Earth. And then he basically apologized, saying he was duped by the forces of the internet that feed what you want to be true.
Wow.
So yeah, we are in quite the gallery of influence. And this has been talked about. There have been documentaries on the business model of Facebook and Twitter and all of these, Instagram, all of these, where they're feeding you things and you don't even know you're sinking into a silo where you don't even know other silos exist. Initially, you say, oh, I'm just in one silo and there's 10 others. And you get deep enough in it, you think that's the whole world. And anybody that does not align with what you just learned, they are the clueless ones. And you are the enlightened one, the anointed one. And you have access to the truth that no one else has. That is dangerous for an informed democracy.
Yeah. Wow.
That we have that susceptibility. So this is where the methods and tools of science come in handy. If somebody makes a claim, you test it. You explore that claim. You don't just buy into it and then double down upon it.
Wow. And I think also the algorithm piece is really important right now. There's a podcast called The Rabbit Hole, which talks about how people are becoming more and more polarized based on the algorithms. Of course, The Social Network came out and a couple other documentaries. So yeah, I think that's really important. I think that we have to be really careful about what we pay attention to, and also to clear our browsers maybe so that we don't get.
I don't have a problem connecting people with other people who have similar interest. If you like to bake, there's a baking group, right? If you like skateboarding,
Right.
all right, these are hobbies and these are interests. But when they become sort of politically charged, then you can be fed on such a level where you are certain everyone who does not share your views is wrong, or that there'll be the end of civilization. And that was never sort of checked at the door when these algorithms started pairing people with other like-minded compatriots.
Right. Right. Neil, quick question before we move on to the last few questions as we're winding down. This has been so fascinating. I have like 100 more questions to ask you, but
I can
I
answer
know
them faster if you prefer. I've
like
been doing a
fire
soundbite
round.
mode. I'm very soundbite trained for the evening news. So if just let me know and we can do it.
Well, so I wanted to talk about astrophysics for people in a hurry and cosmic queries. Why did you write those books, and why the title Astrophysics for People in a Hurry? What was the reasoning behind this book?
Yeah, that came out in 2017, and then it went to number one, of all books, and that was really creepy because I wanted to remind people. You realize this is about astrophysics. Do people need a reality check that they just bought a book on astrophysics? And just to be clear, it's not astrophysics for dummies, right? Holding aside that title was already taken, it's actually real astrophysics. If you read Astrophysics for People in a Hurry, the in a hurry part is that it's a small, short book. But I handpicked the most mind-blowing things about the universe to put in that book, and the most thought-provoking things, and so that anyone would feel like they could access what might be otherwise highly complex concepts. And let me tell you the level at which I did this. By the way, I hate introductions and prefaces to books. Especially those that go on for pages and pages. It's like, if it's that important, put it in the damn book. All right. I don't want to read all this and then begin your book. Put it in the book. All right. So there I am writing a preface. And I said, but I hate prefaces. So what I did was I make sure that, and I forgot in that book how long, if it didn't fit on one page, then it's like a page and a half. Right. So you turn the page and say, oh, it ends right there. I can get through this preface. Right? So there's a lot of sort of psychology of how I wrote that book to keep people engaged because they're reading astrophysics. And it turned out it was very popular. And there's even a young reader's version of it called Astrophysics for Young People in a Hurry. And I think young people should never really be in a hurry, but there it is. We got it.
Amazing.
So that's what motivated me. And it's got some of my most sort of pedagogically invested ways of communicating. So I was delighted that it did so well, delighted and surprised. In the second book you mentioned, Cosmic Queries, that just came out like a month ago. That's a fatter book, but I think it's just as fun to read. It's produced by National Geographic Books. So it's got cool pictures in it. And we took it up a notch, and it wasn't just pictures of the universe, because there's 100 books with pictures of the universe in them. You don't need this for that. It also has artwork that evokes the concept of what was being described in the text. So just to show you that, art and science, there are two ways we try to make sense of the world around us. And then we have different methods and tools, but in the end, they both land within the consumer of that concept. And so in Cosmic Queries, there are questions that have been asked throughout the history of civilization and collected in this book that are the deepest things we have ever asked. All right. So in this book, it's not, oh, how hot is the sun? You can Google that. In this is how did it all begin? What's it all made of? Are we alone in the universe? How will it all end? And some questions have good answers. We got them. Others have answers we're not sure of. We got top people still investigating them. And other questions, we don't even know if it's the right question to ask. That's the bleeding edge. And this takes you there, because this is based on questions we've asked, not on whether or not we actually have answers to them yet. So it's a
Wow.
little more ambitious in terms of your curiosity. And if you've been curious about the universe, it goes there. It totally takes you all places and connects you to the cosmos like nothing else I've ever written.
And it's available on Amazon, correct? Cosmic
Yes, it
Queries.
is. And duty bound to say also on indie books, only because Amazon is squeezing independent booksellers. So I try to make sure you know about all the ways you can acquire the book. Amazon typically does very well in price. And it's also an audiobook too.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
yeah, so I'm delighted that there's been that interest in it just over this past 5 weeks.
Wonderful. Are you the narrator?
So I don't narrate as much as I could,
Hmm.
primarily because they're people where like they're paying their rent on their narrations, right?
Yeah.
And so I wrote the book, and so that should be enough for me.
Yeah.
And let someone else have a payday by narrating the book. And so I found someone who I used in another context to do most of the book. Her name is Lauren Forstag, and for the Forsting, I think I left out a syllable there. She has a crystal clear voice. Oh, it's beautifully clear and crisp, and well, she's got much better diction than I have. But what we did was in this book there are also these insert boxes and an assortment of several dozen of my tweets.
Oh,
So
wow.
you
Okay.
will be on listening to her, but then my voice comes in, and I read my tweets and I read some of these content boxes. So that helps to break if you feel that the science was getting a little heavy. This breaks that for you, and so I
Yeah.
think it was a fun collaboration to do it that way, and I enjoyed it.
Very cool. Yeah, we'll definitely check it out. I love audiobooks.
Hmm.
And Neil, you also started StarTalk, which is a really fascinating podcast. And I feel like you cover so many different types of topics. Why did you start StarTalk?
Yeah, thanks for asking about that. StarTalk has been around for like 13 years, and that's like a billion years ago in podcast time. I think there were like four podcasts when we first
Oh,
hosted a
wow.
podcast. Yeah, I'm pretty sure there were four, and so no, but we actually have a tenure. That's the wrong word. We have time we had spent on what do you call it? Terrestrial radio as well as satellite radio, and we were on TV for a couple of years. So Star Talk has been this living entity over all this time, and it was my attempt to bring science to people who didn't know in advance whether or not they liked science. I mean, there's great science programming out there. There's, Science Friday on NPR, and that's a journalist weekly interviewing a scientist. But if you tune into that, it's because you know in advance you like science. And you probably don't even care who the scientist is. You know it's going to be some fun and interesting science. I get that. But there are more people who are not that than who are that. And how about the people who were once curious in their youth and their curiosity flame has dimmed to an ember, right? I want to refan those coals and have it reignite. And so we figured the way to do this was we invert the model so that the host is a scientist instead of a journalist. And my guests, by and large, maybe a fourth to a third of the time they're scientists. Most of the time they're not. They're people hewn from pop culture, actors, comedians, politicians, entertainers of one stripe or another. And the conversation, we talk about ways that science has touched their lives. And so that you might be a fan of that person. Okay. I've interviewed some pop stars that are, they define the universe of pop culture. Katy Perry was at one point one of my guests, and we talked about a song she wrote about where she fell in love with an alien. And I just had to get to the bottom of that. I just had to find out, okay, what was going on when you wrote this song? And I think I forgot the details of that. Was she attracted to the alien outfit, the costume? But anyhow, you get into, and you learn many of these people have geek underbellies. Okay. Do you know who Josh Groban is?
I do not.
Okay. He's a crooner, a singer. Okay.
Okay.
99% of his audience is female. Okay. I don't know where you were when the call came out to show up at his concerts. Okay. So anyhow, all right. So he has a very devoted following. Okay. But so I'm asked, well, we're talking about all kinds of random things. And I said, were you ever into science at all? He said, well, when he was in high school, he had a science fair project where he took a speaker cone, one of the big kinds, the woofers, and he glued mirrors to the speaker cone, aimed a laser at the mirrors to reflect the laser on the ceiling, and then he played music through that speaker cone. And as it vibrated, you'd see the laser dot dancing on the ceiling. And that was a science fair project. And I said, brilliant.
Wow.
I said, combine music and vibrations and lasers and reflections. And so the point is, what StarTalk, the goal is to bring science into places that previously it was uninvited. Or not specifically uninvited, but was never thought to have been invited in the first place. And as a result, we've been successful entering the commercial marketplace. NPR's Science Friday still begs you for money every quarter, right? As is the way NPR functions, and that's their business model. StarTalk has enough pop culture following that we have actual authentic advertisers who are supporting the science that we are bringing to the public. So we're very proud of it, and we're going to like our 13th season now, and we're spreading out. We want to do we have StarTalk sports edition, right?
Wow.
There's no end of physics in sports, right? There's everything, motion, energy, that's all physics. So we're trying to bring science to places where, like I said previously, it was uninvited.
I love that. Amazing. So I'll include that in the show notes as well.
Mm-hmm.
And Neil, I wanted to ask what matters most to you, knowing everything that you know. How do you prioritize your life? Like, what is important to you these days?
Yeah, thank you for that question. My family is important. All right. I have two kids, one 20 and 24 now. I guess they're not kids. Of course, I think of them that way, but they're not kids. My daughter calls me, on my iPhone and her picture comes up. It's a picture of when she was like 8. I think I should update it. I just haven't gotten around to it, She's still. It reminds me, there's a scene in the movie Father of the Bride with Steve Martin, and he's at a dinner table, and you don't see who the guests are, but it's clearly a holiday dinner. And he's sort of drifting, it looks off in the distance. And there's this din of the dinner conversation going on in the background. It's unintelligible. And you're just wondering, what's he thinking about? And then he hears, "Daddy, I decided I'm going to marry." and he looks, and there's his 8-year-old daughter saying she wants to marry. And then he blinks, and no, she's 23. Okay.
Oh.
So that matters. So I like spending quality time with family, and of course they've got their own agendas, and they're. But holidays we gather, and anytime we're together, we have family meals. So I value that greatly. And then beyond that, nothing is in balance. People say, "How do you balance, your public work with the science and the research?" No, it's never in balance. That's I don't want to call it a fiction. Let me call it I think it's an overrated goal that you want your life to be balanced, because it is the very fact that it's thrown out of balance, because some things at any one moment weigh more than other things or have higher urgency and that need resolution. The fact that it's in balance, I think, fosters innovation in your ability to solve problems, to figure things out. Your efficiencies get improved and enhanced. And so So every day I want to make sure I learn something new that I didn't know the day before. And I want to accrue that to whatever wisdom I can declare that I have, however delusionally, for getting older. All right. People say, well, I wish I was younger again. No, I don't wish I was younger because I was an idiot when I was younger. I like what I've learned. All right. And I value what I've learned. And that comes with age. But if you stop learning, then you ossify at some age point. And then all your time in life that follows it is just getting ready to die, as far as I can tell. Whereas if you remain a lifelong learner, curious about the unknown, then provided you have healthy mind, which can't be said in all cases, unfortunately, because of dementia and other afflictions of the brain. But if you can carry that all the way to the rest of your life. And then when people come to you, you'll be wiser and wiser for every day that has gone by and contribute to the world. Because at the end, you want not to speak for other people, but I don't think this is a stretch to say, I think you want the world to be a better place for you having lived in it.
Yeah. Powerful. Thank you, Neil. And as a science creator with great reach, what kind of actionable social causes do you think we should be paying attention to now, and why? I mean, which social causes are you paying attention to right now?
Yeah, I have I don't want to call it a strict philosophy. I have a practical philosophy of my public engagement, which is I will never tell you what to do. All right. I'm not going to tell you what cause to vote. I'm not going to tell you who to vote for. I'm not going to tell you where to give money. I'm not going to. And it was a little bit embarrassing because Stephen Colbert did the ice bucket challenge with me. Okay. All right. And this is for a really good cause, right? It's ALS, right? So he gets dunked in a bucket of ice and said, I challenged Neil deGrasse Tyson. And then I didn't, because I'm not going to tell you to give money to any one cause or another. I'm just not going to do that. What I will do at all turns that I can is enlighten you as much as I possibly can, so that when you do decide, if you have money that you can give or time to give to a cause, that you've thought it through and realize, that cause is for a greater good. And that's a good, but you would have come up with this on your own. You're not going to say, I'm going to do this because Tyson said so, because Tyson values it. No. If you do it only because I did it, then you didn't think it through yourself. And what kind of an educator would I be if you did things only because I did it? Yeah. If I'm an educator, you do things because you thought I taught you how to think. And now you go think it through all by yourself and you come up with a decision, and I am nowhere to be found in those thoughts. That's my goal. My goal is we have an enlightened world by all the educators, and you don't even remember who enlightened you, because it's not about the person. The moment it becomes about the person, that's like cult building. That's what all cults have in common. There's a picture of the cult leader on the wall. All right. And yes, the cult leader has sometimes deep thoughts and interesting perspectives. Well, then why don't you have those deep thoughts on the wall? No, you have the picture of the person on the wall, typically. So I don't ever want that to happen. Let this be just a spread of thoughts and wisdom, and you take ownership of your own decisions in life.
I love that.
So yeah, I worry about climate change because that contains the seeds of the unraveling of civilization. I worry about misinformation. I worry about that, but so should everybody. That's not just me. That's like, don't you care about tomorrow? Right? If you don't care about tomorrow, at least know the consequences of you not caring about tomorrow. And I think most people who don't care about tomorrow have not been duly instructed on the causes and effects of not caring. And so I'm not going to tell you what to care about, but I'll tell you the consequences of you not caring. How about that? Here's what'll happen.
I think that's great. Yeah. I mean, empowering people to become more enlightened, to make stronger choices and stronger decisions, really.
Yes. And have informed opinions, right? People say, what's your opinion? I don't have an opinion for you. I have opinions, but I'm not. Why do you want to know my opinion? Why do you care? All right. And So no, I don't offer opinion. So much people think that pundits should have opinions that I will post something on the internet and people will think I'm expressing an opinion when I'm just offering information. I find that fascinating. It's one of the most fascinating social cultural observations I have made in the last decade, basically, but mostly in the last several years. An opinion neutral tweet becomes an assumption that it contains opinions, and then people start fighting over what they think it means, rather than just say, "Oh, I never knew that. That's interesting," and then moving on.
Yeah, I like to always say my observation, so that way it kind of gets me away from this is, just my observation is.
Yeah,
right.
but I would say it's not even an observation. It just is.
Yeah.
It just is.
Neil, what do you want to tell our listeners about your main takeaway, like last few comments that you could tell our audience?
Yeah, takeaways, that implies everything can just be encapsulated into one sort of saying or epithet. And sometimes that's true, but maybe real insight comes from having deeper thoughts than just simply a takeaway.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's like people running for office. I got to have a slogan. Otherwise, people won't remember the longer sentence that that is more instructive of my policies, right?
Maybe it's more like a call to action. How about that? Like what's
like I said, I'm not here to call people to action. Here's what it would be. I would say, I think society can benefit if people remained curious about the world and became lifelong learners. And here's what happens. It happens more with adults than with if you're younger and you're in school. You latch on to something that you think is true or that you want to be true, and then you bend over backwards, editing conflicting information, saving information that possibly aligns with it so that you can continue to embrace what you think or want to be true in this world. That is not the posture of an enlightened society. So a school system, I think, needs to change in such a way that you are not glad when the school day ends or when spring break begins or when the summer break starts. No, you are sad. Mm. You are sad because now you're no longer in school where you were enlightened by the day. And each day there was some interesting thing you learned. You couldn't wait to return the next day. And within that, train you to become a lifelong learner because you'll spend many more years not in school than you ever did in school. Getting out of school should not be the end. And to overstate a tired commencement comment, that word means the beginning. It doesn't mean the ending. Whereas everyone at a commencement is thinking, I just ended school, isn't it great? So if everyone is a lifelong learner, then I think there's less of a chance you'll become ossified into something that you need to be true or want to be true, and then have a fight or argument with someone else about it. You'll say, oh, that's interesting. Let me explore that. And then everybody climbs and ascends this ladder of knowledge, always becoming greater and deeper. And so if I were to impart some kind of sense of the world on people, it would be stay curious. Be as curious as an adult as we all were as children.
I love that, Neil. Thank you so much for your time. So for everyone, stay curious. But of course, we've had this incredible conversation with Neil deGrasse Tyson. And Neil, are there any resources that you can point folks to in order to learn more about you? We'll include the Amazon links in the show notes, but is there a kind of a main landing page for folks to connect with you?
Well, just my website is part of the American Museum of Natural History. So by the way, the wiki page, I don't know who writes these wiki pages, but it contains sufficient frequency of incorrect information that my website has my CV. It has links to all my books. It's a highly enriched space for things that I have created. And so it's haydenplanetarium.org /Neil deGrasse Tyson. But you just Google my name, bypass the wiki page, and go straight to the haydenplanetarium.org site, and it's all there. So
Amazing.
thanks for that. Mm-hmm.
Okay, amazing. Neil, thank you so much for your time. Just so grateful that we had this conversation, and I feel very inspired and I want to learn so much more. So thank you again.
Excellent. That's what an educator wants to hear. I'd learned so much more.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, Neil, take care. For our audience, thanks for joining and for listening. In this episode, we learned about the cosmos and investigating our place in the universe with Neil deGrasse Tyson. And you can tune in to Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness, well-being, spirituality. Thanks again.